I would also like to start with thanking the organizers for having me here and giving them a possibility. As my PhD supervisor is actually Peter Hühnermann, yeah, so I am a little bit acquainted with the discussion with Latin America. My idea is just to show you, tell you something about German cultural capital after the Second World War. The Second World War, which was the deepest crisis of the history of the country in the long history. And from my perspective, if we live today in a rather well-organized economy and also a country, this is due to the fact that the cultural capital of the country was actually maintained and also brought into the 21st century. So let me start with the program here. This is not working. Yes.
The other one, I think.
This other one. Here we go. So I'll first talk about the cultural capital as a concept of Christian social sciences. Then I have a brief referring to Quadragesimo Anno, a call for professional ethos and business committees. And we'll talk about business in society, the role of self-administrative bodies, especially in the German context, referring to the German model of the Chamber of Commerce. And then talk about the dual system of professional education, tripartite organizations in action. And finally, some remarks on business NPO partnerships substituting political professional education system. Let me start with a brief methodological reflection. I think what we observe in mainstream social science and beyond the differences between Homo sociologicus and Homo economicus, there are also a lot of similarities here. And Comte's positivism is the mainstream. We have also with Weber that tradition of, in his book, for example, on the Protestant ethics, to emphasize also on the role of human intentions. And of course on sense-making as an integral element of human behavior. And meanwhile, the first one goes into the role of incentives, system theory, and institutional analysis as a mainstream. What we can bring in here is probably also the role of ethos as cultural capital. So I don't think that we have to abandon social sciences as a whole. We are not speaking about the ethos. We are not leaving the realm of social sciences, but we are maybe extending it a little bit, but well grounded in the tradition. Okay. Cultural capital as a subject of Christian social sciences. I think following the lines of social capital and what Ostrom, Bourdieu, Putnam, and Fukuyama, and we already spoke about that a little bit here in the conference, we may speak of cultural capital of a society here, cultural capital. And what is the role of cultural capital? First element is social integration. Cultural capital helps individuals to become part of a national society, developing a sense of belonging and identity. However, cultural capital also means professional standard setting, a role of ethos. Cultural capital provides normative implications, differentiating between good and less good achievements of professional duties, so the professional ethos. And political capital, cultural capital also opens up political participations, opportunities to participate in collective decision-making and self-administration. And what we also should have in the mind here is that social capital is required to create cultural capital. So institutions play a very important role to support the emergence of ethos and sense-making. So cultural capital means an expression and awareness of these kinds of professional duties, which have always been linked with corresponding communities and groups. So the ethos, the professional ethos, is not standing in itself, but it has always its place in corresponding communities and groups of professional people. Professional communities and the ethos that lives in them go hand in hand and mutually reinforce each other, following the Western Christian tradition of religious orders. And let's not forget that the beginning of the ethos in the Reformation with Luther and so on was also, of course, lent from the orders, the religious orders, which already were the origins of the idea of professionalism. So the common profession of a certain set of rules and values constitutes the professional community. And complementary, the reciprocal reminder as well as informal sanctioning also enforces and strengthens the community formation. So if we look back into the honorary salesman, the ethos of the honorary salesman in medieval times, this was of course enforced also by the group mechanism and informal pressure also inside of the guilds and these groups which were the historical background, institutional background of the ethos. And allow me to refer to an idea of an early encyclical, Quadragesimo Anno from 1931 was authored on the background of an enormous economic and social crisis, the crisis of 1929, which is in many ways probably also comparable to the crisis which we faced in the first decade of the 20th century. And of course, what we saw in this sense, let's recall, is a crisis of democracy with the Nazi government taking place, all the disasters of the 20th century, including Holocaust and enormous crime which has been committed. And here the encyclical, which was, by the way, authored, also co-authored by a German Jesuit, Oswald von der Breuning, who plays a very important role. The encyclical and the Pope Pius XI speaks here, the conflict between the hostile classes would be abolished and harmonious cooperation of the industries and professions be encouraged and promoted. The social policy of the state, therefore, must devote itself to the re-establishment of industry and profession committees. Well-ordered members of the social body, industries and profession are constituted in which men have their place, not according to the position each has in the labor market, but according to the respective social function which each performs. So what the encyclical here proposes is the installation of these kinds of mechanisms of professional and industry committees. And meanwhile, the fascist and Nazi corporatism presented a top-down model with professional groups being strictly controlled by governments or ruling party representatives. On the contrary, the Catholic version here in Quadragesimo Anno provides a bottom-up structure. Against totalitarian control and enslavement along ideological lines, QA explicitly fosters empowerment, participation, and voluntary self-regulation among certain professional principles. And therefore, together with the social rights, the encyclica essentially postulates freedom of the industry and profession committees from any direct or indirect manipulation of state or political party. Therefore, Quadragesimo Annus states, those in power should be sure that the more perfectly a graduated order is kept among the various associations and observant with the principle of subsidiarity, the stronger social authority and effectiveness will be, the happier and more prosperous the condition of the state. As we know, of course, Quadragesimo Anno was later heavily criticized by liberal mainstream economists as a document of backwardedness and social romanticism. Therefore, in the academic social science discussion after World War II, Quadragesimo Anno's call for the implementation of industry and profession committees fell into oblivion. However, in the area of political practice, the encyclica provided a blueprint for the creation of institutional frameworks, especially in the world of post-World War II Western Europe. And if we look today in many of the richest and most successful countries, subsidiary self-administration prevailed. For example, where do we find this self-administration? We find it in the institutional design of labor relations, of course. The prepartitism of ILO, and yesterday with Adrian's presentation we also spoke about that. We find it in the area of welfare and social policy issues. We find it in the organization of healthcare system, in industry associations, in the social life of religious communities, in political units like autonomous regions equipped with sovereign rights between nation states. We find it in corporate governance regulations, in the academic and educational sector and public media, but also in unusual areas like hunting associations, fire brigade associations, etc. Subsidiary self-administration possesses certain rules which determine in which situation regulatory intervention becomes legitimate or even necessary. They determine and staff their own governing bodies according to fixed rules. Moreover, a process of registering and reacting to grievances or litigations has to be in place. Vocational documents, as well as corresponding practice of education and personal formation, play a role. And of course, independent self-administrative bodies of the same type, area, regularly stay in contact with each other in the context of superordinate organizations, even international organizations, to allow for benchmarking as well as representing of interest on a higher level. One, probably the most important example of such an institution is the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce, however, which exists at least in two types, in the Anglo-Saxon tradition, this is only a private institution, a kind of a private club in which you become member or not. Meanwhile, in many continental European traditions, this is a public law institutions in which all the companies have to be registered. For example, in Germany, we have obligatory membership in the Chamber of Commerce. Every company, even if you start your own company or being self-employed, has to become member of the chamber. They do not directly stem from medieval predecessors, but emerged during the early industrialization. And subsidiarity played a crucial role for the post-World War II social market economy in Germany, in which also tripartite structures, including co-determination, foster a culture of collaborative leadership in business enterprises, and foster practical wisdom in decision-making of self-administrative bodies rather than political ideology. And I could, if I would have a little bit more time, show like that many important, even economic decisions have been possible because this practical wisdom has been executed. One important consequence of the obligatory membership in the Chamber of Commerce is the dual system of professional education as it developed after the Second World War in Germany. Without the public character of chambers, no obligatory, no dual system of education would be possible. I'll come to this later. helps to keep this professional system of a dual system of professional education is a cornerstone of the competitiveness of the German industry in the international market, a cornerstone. It helps to keep youth unemployment lower than in most European countries. And you see here a list of the European countries. You see that Germany is the lowest and Austria is the second lowest. This is mostly due to the dual system of education. A lower youth unemployment represents a crucial factor also for distributive justice, and we spoke about that in that conference already. What is the role of the chambers for a dual system? The chamber define and organize the dual system as educational scheme, legitimately representing and organizing the multifaceted interest of the Mittelstand companies. They cooperate with the Federal Agency for Vocational Education and Training in order to coordinate the process of defining and adapting the more than 350 educational schemes currently taught in the dual system. Together with the Ministry of Education, the Chamber controls the quality of the educational process in the training companies. Intermediate and final examinations, certifications, registration of apprenticeship contracts, and cooperation with the vocational schools are all guaranteed by the chambers. And the chamber also organizes the practical examination of apprentices in their own buildings. For that purpose, more than 300,000 small and medium entrepreneurs, managers, but also employee representatives every year volunteer in the Chamber of Commerce Examination Committee. Without this massive voluntary engagement of business people, the dual system of education would not work, and Germany would not be as successful in the international markets. Okay, chambers obviously are fine in Germany, and they play a very important role. I could also elaborate on other instruments of organized self-administration within German society. So the government, what happens here is the government delegates important competencies to self-administrative bodies in the healthcare system, in the education system, in the also business sector. We have even autonomy of bargaining on tariffs in the constitution. So the government does not execute all the decisions by itself, but delegates this to autonomous self-organization bodies. And this is what makes the society very inclusive and also practical wisdom, ruling many decisions in spite of political and sometimes ideological decisions. Yeah. Looking, however, in the broader context, we should have a view on encyclical Caritas in Veritate, in which Pope Benedict states there is no reason to deny that a certain amount of capital can do good if invested abroad rather than at home. Yet the requirements of justice must be safeguarded. The requirements of justice may be safeguarded with due consideration for the way in which the capital was generated and the harm to individuals that will result of it, if not used where it was produced. It is true that the export of investment and skills can benefit the populations of the receiving countries. Labor and technical knowledge are a universal good. Yet it is not right to export these things merely for the sake of obtaining advantageous conditions, or worse, for the purpose of exploitation, without making a real contribution to local society and helping to bring about a robust, productive and social system, an essential stable factor for development. So Caritas in Veritate 40. So what we see here in some of these investments in other countries are business NPO partnerships substituting public professional education systems. The widespread practice of superficial, in-house, ad hoc training of local workers, so-called skill formation, does not really contribute to the human and professional development of young native candidates in the process of direct investment. This is precisely what also makes the difference of the professional education system in many European countries compared to a superficial skill formation in which you choose this course and that course and that course in spite of learning a profession, becoming a plumber with the professional ethics ethos of the plumber, which also guides your quality assessment, but also your understanding, your strengthen yourself as a person. And this is precisely what is now here exported in a way also by concept of cooperative educations. Cooperative education is making a real contribution to local society by helping to bring about a robust, productive and social system, an essential factor for stable development. Cooperative education is inspired by the dual system of Central European countries described above. However, it tries to implement that model under completely different institutional and cultural conditions. And it is here where the Salesian groups inside of the Catholic Church comes into play. They are co-organizing together with family firms these business NPO partnerships, substituting public professional education system in the home country, in the host countries. Salesians strive to live up to the Don Bosco pedagogy, aiming at comprehensively personal development of the young people. Consequently, this implies to link the personal and social competence with professional skills as well. Don Bosco Mondo is the global youth and economic development platform of the Salesian community in Germany, planned to move beyond their traditional funding partners from the public sector and search for private business cooperation as a project partner. So what we see here is a business NPO partnerships substituting public professional education. Grohe, for example, is one of these corporate partners, the world-leading supplier of sanitary fittings and a global brand for innovative sanitary products. In the expanding of markets in India and later the Philippines, Grohe had to start a professional education program of the company in the local markets. At the same time, however, the company representatives were also aware of the desperate situation of many young people in many Asian countries. In countries like India or the Philippines, a public sector infrastructure for professional education is virtually non-existent. Now Don Bosco Mondo and Grohe have been opening 3 Grohe dual tech training centers for disadvantaged young people in Asia. What is the logic of these business NPO partnerships? First, it is a multi-stakeholder initiative, including the Association of the Chamber of Commerce and Industries in Germany, the Foreign Chamber of Commerce, the private companies, and also the non-profit education associations like Don Bosco Mondo. Don Bosco Mondo, with its long-standing experience and profound knowledge in the professional education system in Germany, serves as the sparring partner of the companies. Don Bosco Mondo has organized blocked schooling, certifies the results in a publicly recognized and appreciated format, supports to adapt the educational program, and organizes complementary events to foster the development of apprentices. Therefore, Don Bosco Mondo assumes roles executed by the Chamber of Commerce, but also by the public professional schools in Europe. So the Don Bosco Mondo, of course, there is no public system in India and in the Philippines, but Don Bosco Mondo steps in and becomes the sparringspartner, assumes partly roles of the Chamber of Commerce and partly roles also of the professional school. Because dual system means that the young people 3 days a week they work in a company, 2 days a week they work in the public. They go to the public school, and both elements are then coordinated in the context of educational schemes. Business NPO partnerships are substituting public professional educational systems, in the sense that more than 800 young professionals have already successfully complemented their training at 3 grower dual tech locations and easily found a job at the supplier companies. Cooperation partners also succeeded to substantially improve the image of the plumbing profession by showing the prospects this area can actually open for graduates. I think a large problem of the educational system is that we are, in many countries of the cultures of the world, we are lacking an accepted, high esteem way of professional activity below high school level. Yeah, so we have to write only those people who made it to high school are the one who really succeeded in their professional life. Meanwhile, below, this is not possible. With the dual system of education, this is different. Yeah? If you have a good practical education here in the Chamber of Commerce, dual system of education, and also in this kind of adapted forms of schooling in foreign locations, you have your own ethos. You have also very good possibilities to acquire an income and organize your family living. For example, a young Indian confirms, I like being a plumber and I'd like to work in this industry as long as it gives me prospects. Grow a brand at the joint educational program helps to legitimize it among applicants as well as hiring companies. And another graduate of the program says, for me, Grower is the Jaguar among the sanitary ware brands. And this business and society partnerships, which has been evolved here from a partnership between the NGO and the company, is now also spreading to other locations. In 2016, a cooperation agreement was announced between the company and the civil society partner in order to continue the common commitment in the future. Recently, the partners also extended this model to other continents, and the first center in Africa is coming up in Nairobi in early 2018. So what we see here is a partnership. A partnership is very necessary because the alternative to that form of cooperative education is mere in-house training of the young people. But in-house training is limited in the skill set which is educated, and it also provides only very limited perspectives to the young people. And makes them dependent from their employer. Yeah? They have no generally accepted education, which helps them also to easily change, for example, the employer and profit from the competition, not only among employees, but also a competition among employers. Yeah? But you can only profit from the competition among employers if you have a good certificate and you have an accepted position here in the labor market. So what helps what these kind of partnerships bring in is a substitute for a lack of public structure in many countries, and helps young people to go their job, even to find their way, even in the context of very difficult economic positions. Thank you very much for the attention.